Another powerful and exciting area that we want to look at in Solid Edge ST3 utilizing the Iron Eagle material is the ERA environment, or Explode, Render, and Animate environment. In order to do that, we're going to come up to our display configurations and we're going to change to number 10, Animation. Now basically this allows us to kind of focus in on this design task, and this is what we're going to be looking at. So the first thing that we're going to do is let's go ahead and open up this subassembly so we can kind of work just in this subassembly itself. And you'll notice here that we have in this case some linkage that basically pulls up the mower deck. And so in that case, what I'm going to do, since we've in place activated, I'm going to go to this subassembly's display configuration and go to the moving linkage so we can just focus in on our design task for this. Now you'll notice that we have this linkage here, again, that, as I mentioned earlier, that's going to lift up or lower down the deck. And if I just go over and drag, you'll notice how the assembly relationships keep all of the parts together, and everything appears to be put together so that it'll all move as it should. So what I'm going to do at that point is, before we go into the Explode, Render, and Animate environment, I want to apply a motor so that we can actually animate this particular motion of this linkage. Now you'll notice up here under the Home tab we have a command called Motor, and it's going to create a rotary or linear depending on what you select to do here. Here in this case we're going to use a rotation, and we're going to use 30 degrees a second, and for our limit I'm going to set that to also to 30. And once we've done that, basically all you have to do is identify where you want the motor applied. So I'm going to pick this front bar, and then I'm going to give it a direction. Now obviously I can change that direction through the ribbon bar here very easily, but once we're done, basically it's going to add that motor to our pathfinder. So at any point in time, if I need to go back and make a change to that motor, I can do it very easily. Now if we want to make sure that the motor is going to do as it should, we can always simulate it very quickly, which brings up the animation editor, and in this case you can see that it added it to a timeline here, and if I run this, you notice it moves down 30 degrees and then it stops. So that's exactly what we're looking for. So in this case we will just go ahead and get out of that, and we now have our motor applied and we know that it's going to move our linkage down. So the next thing that we want to do is let's go ahead into the ERA environment. Again, Explode, Render, and Animate. And the first thing that we're going to look at when we get into this environment is the Explode environment. Now again, the neat thing about using Explode is it better helps you to better visualize parts, to better see how they maybe are assembled together. Also, when you create an explosion, you can bring that exploded view into draft to help you build technical or service manuals. So exploding your parts becomes very key to that type of work, and you need to have the tools that you can do, that you can actually take these parts and create the explode that you're looking for. We have two methods. We have an automatic method where it just explodes either the top level assembly and all the parts under it, or sub-assemblies, and we also have the manual method. Now I'm going to use the manual method in this case and just work on this front corner. And you'll notice all I have to do is identify the component, and then I just have to tell the system what component I want to explode it off of. In this case I want to go down, and I'll just go ahead and leave that default distance, and you notice it pushes it down. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over and I'm going to grab the two nuts on the end of these bolts here, and I want to explode them. And I want to explode them out from the back side of this rod. So we want to go in that direction, and it allows us to move them as a unit or spread components evenly. We're going to move them as a unit, and we'll go ahead and accept that. We also need to move this shaft down, and so I'm going to pick the lower face to move it down, and then we want to move the nut, and we want to move it upwards, and then finally we want to move several components outward away from this particular assembly. And you notice I selected several components, and when I pick the direction, you'll notice that again it comes up. Anytime you pick more than one component, the system gives you an option to move them as a unit. In this case, we're going to use the spread components evenly just so you get a better idea of what that does. And then we'll go ahead and explode them. And you notice it moved them all out evenly away from the rest of the assembly. Now obviously we also supply our users tools to manipulate the explode once it's created. For example, the drag component is probably the most powerful. If I, for example, select this and accept it, you notice a triad is connected, so I can easily move this component. You notice how it adds a jog in our flow line. So again, very easy to manipulate. If I grab the drag component again and grab this component here, because I have multiple components or dependent parts turned on, as I move it, all of the dependent parts that are attached to it will also move. So maybe I want to tighten this up a little bit. It allows me to do that very easily. Now, once our explode, or in this case our explode, is created, I do want to point out that in Pathfinder we do show you the parts that are exploded, and you notice we created independent groups for those components that we selected. So again, we allow you to go in and actually manipulate any of the components or any of the groups that you created after the fact. One thing I think is important to do is once we have this explode created, we need to save it so that we can utilize this. And so I'm going to call it linkage explode. And now we've got that saved. So again, being able to come in and explode your components so you can better visualize the components and how they actually work within the assembly and how they can be actually assembled together, or even if you're just building technical or service manuals where you would take this into the view into the draft environment and add balloons and a parts list, so people get a better idea if they're looking at a technical manual what part is what. That's how the explode can be used. Another benefit to the ERA, Explode, Render, Animate, is to be able to animate these components. So I'm going to start up the animation editor, and again it's going to bring up this timeline much like we saw earlier when we applied the motor. The neat thing about the animation editor is that we can apply motors. We can also apply the explode, where we can implode or explode while it's moving, and we can also change appearances and even create different camera paths if we need to. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and grab that motor that we created initially and add it to our timeline. Now once that motor is added to the timeline, there's other things that we allow our users to do. For example, this is just the assembly moving down 30 degrees. So what I want to do is I want to copy it, and once it moves down, I want it to mirror this so that it moves back up. And I'm just going to move it up next to the other motor. So now it's going to move down, and then it should move back up. Another thing that I would like to do is I'd like to take that explode